Hi, and welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is the third webinar of the 5 and 3 Challenge series, and it's titled Taking Charge of Your Environment. My name is Madison. I'll be your presenter today, and without further ado, let's get started. Today in Taking Charge of Your Environment, we're going to talk about food cues, what they are and how they relate to you, activity cues, portion control, how it relates to our environment, and finally some strategies for taking charge of our environment. So let's first start off talking about what food cues are and how they relate to you. And our first example I'm going to share with you could be a carton of ice cream, or any kind of food for that matter. You see a carton of ice cream in a store, or you walk by an ice cream shop, and what does it make you want to do? Eat ice cream, most likely. Or another example could be if you're sitting down to watch TV, it may make you crave potato chips because maybe in the past when you've sat down to watch TV, you have had a habit of eating snack type foods. Or maybe you're at the movies, and just because you're at the movies and doesn't mean you're necessarily hungry or not, but it makes you want to eat popcorn because that's what you have always done at the movies. So food cues are cues in your environment that make you want to eat. And you may not necessarily even be hungry or wanting that food or needing to eat, but you're cued by an external factor, not by your internal need for food. And like I said, cues can happen for many reasons, and we're going to go through this list right here. So what cues you to eat? Hunger could be one of them. That certainly could be one that your body is telling you that you're hungry. It could be something that you're thinking or a way that you're feeling that prompts you to want to eat a specific food. It could be dependent on what other people are saying or doing. It could be the sight and smell of food, and there's physiology that goes along with smelling food and seeing food. And certain activities could also make you want to eat food, like we just talked about, watching TV or reading magazines and seeing food or something like that. Kind of that comfort that goes along with certain activities may make you want to eat food. Okay, so I want you to think about this in your environment as we move on to the next slide, because things that you have been doing throughout your whole life have created a habit. And when you respond to food cues like these over and over and over again in the same way, you are developing a habit. And you may not even realize it, but by responding to these food cues in your environment day after day, you have developed a habit by really not even knowing it. Okay, so as we move to the next slide, as well, I want you to think about first your home and some food cues that could be in your home. Do you have junk food out in the open? Do you have, brownies and chips on the counter, easily seen? Or do you have things like fruit that's readily available and you see it every time you walk by? This really makes a difference, and we're going to talk about this later in the webinar, how much of a difference it really can make, because you're either cued to eat a more healthy food or a less healthy food just by it being on the counter or right there when you open the fridge. I also want you to think about your workplace. If you do work at an office or someplace like that, think about it. Does your work have a cafeteria that you have to walk by, or if you go to it and there's tempting foods, or is there a snack table that coworkers always bring in junk food, and you're always having to walk by it every time you go to the copy machine? Things like that can really affect your food choices every day, and we make a lot of food choices every day whether you realize it or not. We make so many just in the morning. Am I going to eat breakfast? Am I not? What am I going to eat? Am I going to eat it now? Am I going to eat it later? There are so many decisions that we make about food every single day, and it's all being affected by things in our home and at work. And I also want you to think about even just driving. Do you drive to work past fast food restaurants or bakeries that you're tempted to stop at? Or do you have to pass a tempting restaurant on the way home? Or do you have the habit of eating in your car? All of these things can be controlling your eating habits, and they can be affecting your dietary goals. So, food cues, how can you change your problem food cues and habits? So we're going to give you some strategies now, and the first one is to, if you can, stay away from the cue or keep it out of sight. Out of sight, out of mind here is the idea, and this goes along with what I talked about earlier. In your kitchen, think about what you want to be eating and have those foods readily available and in sight. So have a bowl of fruit, out on the counter. Have your fruits and vegetables at the front of the fridge, already cut up, ready to grab and go, and maybe have your less healthier foods, not that any food is good or bad, but have your less healthy foods in harder to reach places if you keep them in the house at all. You can keep them in the back of the cupboard, in the back of the fridge, or maybe you don't even want to have it in the house at all. Secondly, it's important to not only break an old bad habit, but replace it with a healthier habit. So this will help you if you're trying to break a poor food cue, to replace it with a healthier cue. So say, for example, you have the habit of stopping at a coffee shop or a Dunkin' Donuts every day on the way to work and get your coffee and you get a donut. Okay, well maybe if you don't want to do that anymore because it's not lining up with your dietary goals, your weight loss goals, or your healthy food intake goals, it's important to replace that habit with something. Maybe you could still stop somewhere, but you could stop somewhere else that only serves coffee, so you don't even have the option. Or maybe you just don't have coffee at a restaurant. Maybe you always make it at home and bring it with you in the car, or maybe you always drink it at work. So make sure that you're replacing your old habit with a new habit. And remember, these take time, so don't get frustrated if you cave after one day or 1 week. It's going to take time for you to make a new habit. So activity cues are similar, yet they pertain to physical activity. So activity cues could be things like always having your gym bag at work or in your car. So even if you forget something for your workout, you always have an extra pair. That's a positive activity cue. Okay, we're going to talk about activity cues in terms of positive and negative activity cues. And the next example, as you'll see on the page in the middle, maybe working out alone is a negative activity cue for you. And so if it is, if you don't have a workout buddy, or if your workout buddy cancels on you, that's going to be a negative activity cue for you. So it's important to know that about yourself. And if you do like working out alone or you don't, you have a strategy to support that. You always have, a buddy that you can rely on and a backup, or you do something else, that you don't need an exercise buddy for. So that can be a positive or a negative activity cue depending on the type of preferences that you have. And my last example is social activities can oftentimes be negative activity cues. If you're the type of person that is very social and likes to go out and meet people for dinner or drinks or whatever that is, that can be a negative activity cue because you could have goals to exercise after work or whatever it may be, but maybe social events are getting in the way of that. And it's just important to recognize these, not that any of these are right or wrong, but the point here with this is to recognize what are your positive and negative activity cues and how you can arrange it so that you have much more positive activity cues than negative activity cues, because that is going to encourage you to be more physically active and decrease the amount of barriers you have to physical activity. So moving to the next slide, I have some examples here again of positive activity cues, and these are just kind of some tips for you as well. For more positive activity cues, keep exercise equipment in sight. Like I mentioned, always have an extra pair of shoes in your car or in your at your work or in your home, have a calendar so that you've scheduled your activities, or maybe a graph of your goals. It can be important to set up activity dates with people that can give you support to be physically active, or maybe set an alarm or a timer to remind you. Some negative activity cue examples could be watching TV. Maybe if you get home and you start watching TV, it's kind of, never going to happen then. So maybe think about that and not let yourself go home and be tempted to watch TV. That's how you can eliminate a negative activity cue, by kind of doing little things to switch your schedule around, or just small changes that can really help you to have more positive activity cues than negative activity cues. Climbing the stairs each time you need to take something up. Do these things so that it kind of makes you be more physically active. And like the other example I used, work around your social events if you know that is a negative activity cue for you. And you could relate to some of these, and some of yours might be totally different. But take the time to really think about yourself and what are your positive and negative activity cues, and how can you make it so that you have more positive than negative. I also want to touch on portion control and how it relates to what we're talking about today. Plate size and portion control have a lot to do with your environment. And if you remember from our earlier webinar, in webinar 1, we talked about how plate size can affect how much we eat, because often as Americans we eat with our eyes and not listening to our stomachs. So even just having a smaller plate size can make it look like we're eating more food, and that's just one way that you can control your environment, is by having smaller plates and smaller dishware. Serving sizes also, think about also ordering in smaller sizes, and packaged food like bulk shopping. It's very interesting. Research has shown that when people buy in bulk, they actually go through the food just as fast as they would a regular sized package, but because there's more of it, they eat more of it and they eat it faster. It's very interesting. So think about that with if you buy in bulk, and how fast you're actually going through your food. And then when you're out to eat, of course, in America, you're going to have servings that are probably twice as big as you really need. So there are some strategies that you can use for that to control your environment. Things such as splitting a meal with somebody, putting half of your meal away right away to leftovers so you're not tempted to eat the other half. Just ordering, small plates instead of large entrees. Little things like that can really help you to control your portions in your environment. So now I want to talk about the strategies, and I'm going to talk about strategies at home, at work, and in the car. Okay, so this I think is going to be the most helpful part of our presentation today. So controlling your environment at home. And like I touched on before, put the healthy foods in easy to reach places. On the counter, on the front of the fridge, in the cupboards, and put the less healthy food in hard to reach places. Okay, I want you to get this in your mind, because it really can make a difference. Okay, out of sight, out of mind. At work, if you were trying to eat healthier, you don't have to be the employee that brings in the unhealthy choices for other people to eat. Okay, bring in the healthy choices. Avoid walking by the unhealthy choices table if you have one of those. I know we have one at work, and I know it can be hard, but maybe take a different way to get to your destination, and maybe that might help rather than tempting you every time you walk by. And same goes with the cafeteria. If it's hard for you to make healthy choices in there, maybe bring your healthy choices to work. So those are the only options that you have are healthy choices. You don't even have an option to choose an unhealthy food. Stick together. Maybe get a coworker to support you. This can help you a lot, so you don't feel like you're the only one, trying to do it alone. And lastly, in the car, it can be really tempting if you are a fast food person and you have to pass by fast food restaurants or other restaurants on your way home, or just, running errands. So you could try taking alternate routes to get home. And I think this is really important. Avoid eating in the car. When we eat in the car, we're often distracted, and first of all, it's not really safe, And second of all, you're probably not enjoying your food and really taking the time to taste it, which is just it's not as nice of an experience because you're not tasting your food and those calories you're taking in, and you're probably eating a lot faster as well, which isn't good for you either. So think about how this relates to your life and maybe some things that you might want to think about putting into action that can help you take charge of your environment in these ways. So that concludes today's webinar. As I said, this is the third webinar. We have one final webinar next week on positive self-talk, and I think that's going to be a really interesting topic. I'm excited to talk to you about that. So I will look forward to seeing you then. Take care.